welcome to the pod. My name is Sean Graves, and today's guest is Donald Skip Conover, is the creator of Archetype and Action.com and the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group on YouTube. Links provided in his show notes. He is the third individual to be awarded the, quote, Water Bearer Award in 2002, hailing from the University of Rochester Simon Business School with an MBA in Financial Economics. He's been honored as a distinguished alumnus and is currently the president of Inca IPPC Ltd, affiliated with the International Pandemic Preparedness Center. Welcome, good sir.
Just one correction there.
I apologize.
The award came in 2022, not 2002.
Oh, I understand. My apologies.
It just came in June. So.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Well, still, congratulations to
Thank
you, sir.
Thank you so much.
So, why we're here today is we're talking about a subject matter that I have been diving deep into for the past 2 years.
Mhm.
That is Carl Gustav Jung. For those who don't know, just diving in real quickly, Carl Gustav Jung, our professor Carl Gustav Jung, late and great, was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, because that's a thing, who founded an analytical psychology. Jung's work has been influenced in the field of psychiatry, anthropology, these are all just ologies of sorts, archaeology, literature, philosophy, psychology, and religious studies. Among the central concepts of analytical psychology is individuation, the lifelong psychological process of differentiation of the self out of each individual's conscious and unconscious elements, which is part of what we're going to be getting into today.
Okay.
Jung's considered to be in the main task of human development. He created some of the best known psychological concepts, including synchronicity.
Synchronicity.
Yeah. Oh, some of these words are like, I've been trying to read it and go like this.
Yeah, right.
I think some of these are made up.
Yeah, synchronicity, they are made up.
Archetypal phenomena, the collective unconscious, and sociological complex, and extroversion and introversion. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Extroversion, introversion. Yes. So that is Carl Gustav Jung in a nutshell, without getting too specific on his life and all that. So how did you, good sir, get introduced to Carl Gustav Jung?
Well, I was teaching finance, believe it or not, at the University of Maryland Graduate School. Mm-hmm. And I had a fellow professor who introduced me to the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And she was a beautiful woman, so my animus said, learn as much as you can from this woman, right? And so over lunch and for 10 days, she explained Myers-Briggs to me as well as she could. And then I started studying books on Myers-Briggs. And then in 1990, I got the hardbound copy of Man and His Symbols. And so and this is it. If you get Man and His Symbols, please try to find a used copy of the hardbound. Yeah. Because the paperback hasn't used the color plates. And the color plates are very, very helpful in this book. But in any case, I have both copies now, but there are used copies of this available on Amazon, and I urge everyone to find a copy of it and read it.
I actually heard that book, Man and His Symbols, via audiobook. And my first introduction to Carl Gustav Jung, which I'll bring up later on, because it goes into pop culture, is a little video game that you may have heard of. There was a couple movies made up of it, called Silent Hill. And Silent Hill was created by a group of developers in Japan named Team Silent.
Hmm.
And a lot of the idea is based on occultism for Silent Hill. I don't know if you've heard of this video game before. It's a scary game. Um,
I don't know of it. No.
it was originally made in 1999. So little high school me is playing this scary video game, and even Silent Hill 2, it also delves into a lot of the idea of the ego, the shadow, the anima animus, the self, and a lot of the other characters, or I'm sorry, characters, but yes, characters in the video game also are archetypes like the thief, the trickster, the
Oh yeah.
mother, the yes. So we'll get into all that, but
Hmm.
oh, a little bit, but the umbrella of it all, because it
Right.
is a huge this subject of Carl Gustav Jung and what he like lectured in the 1950s is so profound and huge. And so this video game, when I found out, oh wait, these are archetypes. What's an archetype? What, oh, who's Carl Gustav Jung? Okay, what's this about? And then that's how I
Right.
rabbit holed into Carl Gustav Jung. And you mentioned Myers-Briggs and on deployment during the epic 10-month deployment of 2019.
Hmm.
Um, I met a chief, and she was like, "Oh, what's your MBTI?" And I'm like, I have no idea what this is. So when I had the chance to open the internet, I went to the website, did the 100 question, thing, found out what my four letters are, and I was just like, well, I just feel like I just got read, you know?
Okay. Are you ready for me to read you? I'm going to take a guess at what your MBTI is.
Sure, what's
Fair
up?
enough.
Fair
Okay.
enough.
My guess is extroverted,
Mm,
intuitive, um, thinking, and judging.
yes.
So INTJ.
Yes.
Um, and I am INTP, but you're the same as my wife.
Ah, I see. I see. I see. My partner, he did the quiz just as well. Actually, we did the I had him do this like without him knowing like what exactly it was all about when we first started dating, about a month into dating. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Here, take this little quiz. You like little quizzes, right? It has little
Yeah,
pictures at the end and everything."
right.
Um, he's the helper. I can't remember which one that one's called, but it's one of the yellow characters, the guy with the
Mhm.
little waist belt and everything. But yeah, I was like, oh, I can remember the image and things. But yeah, yep.
Yeah. Well, good.
Good read, good
So
read.
yeah, so I mean, these days I've been doing it for 35 years, so at
Hmm.
this point I can pretty much read people
That's awesome. That's
very
really
easily.
cool.
Yeah.
Um, what aspects of Carl Gustav Jung captivated you from the young lady at college just going right in from Myers-Briggs to
Yeah.
Carl Gustav Jung? I mean, Man and His Symbols is a huge book to start off on, I
Well,
would think.
it's actually his book he intended for laymen,
Oh,
and
really? Okay.
I was obviously a layman. I mean, I'm a retired Marine,
Mm-hmm.
lawyer, MBA. You know, I was not into psychology. I never took a psychology course,
Same.
um, even till today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, at first, after I read Man and His Symbols, I did not read anything directly from Jung. I read everybody around him. I read
Mm.
um, Jean Shinoda Bolen and Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Um, she wrote a wonderful book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. That
Ooh,
really got my attention.
let
And
me write that down.
yeah,
Women Who
it's
Run with Wolves.
right. And Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I still keep it within arm's length. I could prove it to you, um, but anyway, my mother, it was a bestseller back in the early 90s. My
Mm.
mother gave it to my wife for Christmas, and I picked it up the day after Christmas and started to read it, and I said, "No, you can't have it."
It
And
was,
I read
oh,
it in in 2 days, uh,
wow.
and it was very important to me. And Jean Shinoda Bolen um, wrote two books, uh, "Goddesses in Every Woman" and "Gods in Every Man."
Mm,
And there were many other books that I read, but I was mainly reading about him because
mhm.
I assumed wrongly that his main books, and he wrote his collected works are 20 volumes.
I
So
know, and I have
it's not,
3 of them, and I screwed up. I'll tell you how.
yeah. Well, so I was reading around him,
Mhm,
and then a man named Louis LaFontaine, uh, who received recently the fifth Water Bear Award.
mhm,
He urged me to read Jung directly,
mhm.
and I started to do that. And all of a sudden, I said, "Hey, this is about religion, and this is about all the stuff that I am not happy about religion."
Mhm.
Okay,
Wow.
and I'm, among other things, I had an experience in 1999, I believe, where my daughter had fallen in with fundamentalists in Russia, and
Mm.
she came back from Russia. She'd been out there on a USIS scholarship, and she and I had dinner one evening, and then just as we're separating, she um, says, "Well, Dad, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell."
Oh, that's
And
unfortunate.
I go,
Yeah, like,
who
what?
teaches a child to say that to a parent, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And
That's very bold.
yeah, and so in that moment, I dropped into hell, and on the ride back from Washington, where this dinner was, to my home here in Annapolis,
Mhm.
um, I had a vision of Mephistopheles dropping down into the passenger seat of my car,
Mm.
and it probably happened in 5 seconds or less.
Mhm,
I was
mhm.
traveling at 65 miles an hour,
A lot can
and
happen.
and but I recognized him from my reading of Faustus when I was in college.
Mhm.
So I said, "Well, you can have my immortal soul on my death, provided none of my daughters think that of me for the rest of my life."
Mm.
He disappeared. Okay, and never came back. But that was quick thinking,
Mhm.
and I didn't crash the car as a result.
Thankfully.
But
Wow.
I mean, what that told me is that these fire and brimstone preachers who get people all worked up about the occult and about
Mhm.
things like the devil and so on, um, can scare people and can
Mhm.
scare people about objects that are um, in their unconscious.
Mhm.
And that got me wanting to know more about what was going on. And so I started to study it. It took me 10 years to work my way out of that particular hell.
Wow.
But I did manage to do it, and I did it thanks to reading Jung and
Yeah.
and having him be my shrink. Actually, I never had psychotherapy. I
Mhm.
just kept reading and reading and reading, and I'm saying, yeah, yeah, I get this now, and so on.
One thing that I noticed from reading Ion is that one, for as small as a book as it is, it's a thick read. I
Mhm,
purchased it for my. I don't know if you do this, but I don't necessarily trust people during the holidays. I'll
mhm,
give them a Christmas list, and then I'll give them like my Christmas list, and I'll be like,
mhm.
I know that 95% of this is not going to get touched.
Yeah,
So, Santa Sean has to go and buy himself his own books.
yeah.
One of them was Ion, and it took me 6.5 months to read Ion,
Sure.
and it was easy at first. And then when we get into the weedly weeds of it all, I think about chapter four, no, I'm sorry, five, Christ, a symbol of the self, is when
Yep.
everything started to slow down. And I started to
Yeah,
realize
that's when it hit
that,
me too. Exactly.
yes, this is like the subject matter where I'm like, okay, so we've gotten past chapter one, two, three, and four, which is like the thesis, if you will.
Mhm.
And now we're actually he's having to prove his points with all these subsequent chapters in Ion. And it was something that I realized, this is not a book for, one, don't read this as your first young book.
Yep.
Two, marinate in every port. Like if you have an hour to read, let that hour be your hour to read it and then walk away and
Yeah.
think about, ruminate on the information. If you don't understand it, that's fine. You can always go back and maybe pencil around ideas that you have questions about, but this is a thinker book, definitely, because
Yeah.
it makes you think. And it reaffirmed for me, I think, what I call the age of enlightenment, and I take that from the late and great George Carlin. He
Mhm.
had, in one of his stand-ups, he called his moment
Yeah.
of of I would hate to say that it's called higher thinking, but understanding that there's a lot of the BS in what people are saying vice what they're doing.
Right.
That inner, like, those actions versus what they're doing. And he goes, wait, you can't have these two things when it comes to spirituality. You can't be saying you're doing one thing but then doing a complete opposite. Where's this
Right.
energy coming from? And I feel like in that small little moment in his stand-up, I believe in 2003 or 2006,
Mhm.
um he even made myself, by the way, I graduated in '06.
Mhm.
So over a decade ago, it made my head go click. Wait a
Mhm.
minute. It's not just because George Carlin's a comique, but also the fact that he's an intellect
Mhm.
without
Mhm.
really, and I mean that's what a comedian is too. Comedians
Sure.
take intellection and spin it into a funny manner as well, much
Right.
like the fool as an archetype. But um that's the thing that like really made me go, and everything's starting to connect a little bit. Not like in a theorist kind of way where it's like you gotta follow the entrails. No, no, no. It's just, if you think about it, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this isn't self-confirming what I believe or what I feel. It's like it empirically is showing itself as like, I'm not the only one that has noticed these trends in life and just didn't brush them off and
Right.
go, oh, whatever.
Well, comedians use the shadow, which is
Mhm.
in the unconscious, right?
Yep.
As their trick, right?
Mm.
And so,
No problem, no problem. So, yes, comedians are using the shadow as, which is a part of Ion. That's like the second chapter there.
yeah,
Um, but before we even get into that, discussing about Ion is the research into the phenomenology of the self, originally
right,
published in German in 1951.
right.
Is one of the major works of Jung later years. The
Hmm.
central theme of the volume is the symbolic representation of the psychic totality through the concept of the self, whose
Right,
traditional historical equivalent is the figure of Christ. Jung demonstrates his thesis by an investigation of the Allegoria Christi, especially the fish symbol, also of Gnostic and alchemical symbolism,
yeah,
which he treats as phenomena of cultural assimilation. The first four chapters provide a valuable summation of these key concepts in Jung's system of psychology. So those four chapters, again, that would be the ego, the self, anima and animus,
yeah,
and the self. And
right,
like, it's unfortunate that you have to get way further into the book to start getting pictures of how everything's set up. But I
right.
was also very thankful that that wasn't paid off at the beginning.
Mhm.
because even I myself had to sit there and write down notes in my own
Well, you have
little
to gain your own
journal.
experience. Yeah, you have to gain
Mhm.
your own experience. I'll tell you, you hit exactly the point I hit, which is I started reading that chapter 5 and I said, "Are you talking about the Son of God?" You
Yeah.
know, and and sure enough, but then in about 2005, I guess,
Mhm.
I uh, I happened to see the YouTube video of Carl Jung being interviewed,
Mm.
and the interviewer asked him, "Do you believe in God?"
Mhm.
And he said, "Well, very complicated. I
Yes.
don't I I don't have to believe. I know."
Mhm.
And at that moment, I had an epiphany, and I said, "Wow, I know too."
Mhm.
But then I had to spend the next 10 years figuring out what it is that I know.
Mhm.
And it's fundamentally represented in that fifth chapter of Ion.
Mhm.
Um, and the essence, shall I give an overview of my
Sure.
perspective of religion and
Yeah.
Jung?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. I'll share as well.
all right. The key to Jung is individuation.
Mhm.
And I'll come back to what individuation is in a minute.
Mhm.
But Jung was the son of a pastor and descended from 6 generations of pastors. So he was steeped in um, Swiss Reformed theology.
Mhm.
Um, and he was having, problems like I had with Mephistopheles, where, when he was 11 years old, he sees this huge god uh, appear to him in the stratosphere and drop a giant turd on the Cathedral of
Yeah.
Basel,
Yeah.
destroying it,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Mhm.
And he was trying not to think that thought. He kept holding that thought off, but
Mhm.
it kept coming, kept coming, and kept coming, and then boom,
Mhm.
and the point is that um, the church is not God, okay,
Yes.
and the church has done a lot of pretty dastardly things over the last couple of millennia,
Yeah.
and and all religious faiths have their mullahs and so on who get away from the mainstream of what it was all about.
Mhm.
And so, what he's talking about is that there are two God images. One
Mhm.
God image is within each one of us.
Mhm.
And whether you know it or not, sooner or later, you're going to recognize this because and it's also called the self,
Mhm.
but there's no question that it is in charge of your life. It's
Mhm.
absolutely in charge of your life. And um, and so in Jungian psychology, we call that the God image,
Mhm.
but it is also called the self. And I'll talk about individuation in a minute. But there's another God, and that God uh, is unique for each one of us.
Mhm.
Okay, it's unique for each one of us, and each one of us has to find that God. And so Jung wrote a letter. See if I can put my hand on it quickly. I think I can. I keep my Jung books at the ready. Um,
I actually lent my copy of Ion to a friend of mine because he was like, "What's the scariest book you've ever read?" I was like, "Ion, Ion."
yeah, we can talk about that, but I want to just read one paragraph, and this
Sure.
is the book, "The New God Image,"
Mhm.
which is a study of Jung's key letters concerning the evolution of the Western God image by
Mhm.
Edward Edinger. It's a very good,
Evolution of the God image, by the way. Evolution, right?
right.
This thing is ever changing, ever growing, and evolve. Like again, there's no better word for that, but
Precisely,
exactly.
precisely. And God is changing in every minute,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all making a contribution to that.
Yep.
But this will sort of sum it up for you in one paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
This is a letter that he wrote in 1957 to the Reverend David Cox. Um, I have read the entire letter online,
Mm-hmm.
so you can find my reading of all 14 letters that are here
Mm-hmm.
um, on the YouTube channel. But um, here's this paragraph that's so important.
Okay.
Although all this sounds as if it were a sort of theological speculation, it is really modern man's perplexity expressed in symbolic terms. It is the problem I so often had to deal with in treating the neuroses of intelligent patients. It can be expressed in a more scientific way, psychological language. For instance, instead of using the term God, you say unconscious.
Mm.
In, Instead of Christ, self.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of incarnation, integration of the unconscious. Instead of salvation or redemption, individuation. Instead of crucifixion or sacrifice on the cross, realization of the four functions or of wholeness. Um, I think it is no disadvantage to religious traditions if we can see how far it coincides with psychological experience. On the
Yeah.
contrary, it seems to me a most welcome aid in understanding religious traditions. Okay, so that may be the most important paragraph I ever read.
That is
Um,
amazing. And actually, you know what? That I think that letter must have been written many, many years after the publication of Ion.
no, not so long. It was
Oh, not
written
so
in
long?
57, and Ion came out around 52.
Okay, yes. So I'm just shook that that never made it in. That could
To
have been
Ion,
that could have on like because we'll talk about the conclusion because I don't know how you felt about it, but we'll get there. That could have easily been put into the conclusion of Ion, you
sure,
know, and
right.
it would have. I sit here go like this. Wow, this is a year, almost a year later since I read Ion, and I'm like,
Hmm.
yes, that confirms everything of that journey of Ion that I personally went through for 6 months. And by the way, the only reason why I read Ion was because from playing Silent Hill, the video game, for so long, and playing the main character who's thrown into this foggy world with monsters and all he wants to do is find his daughter and he meets
Yeah.
these characters and all that and there's like these again archetypes. It quickly made me realize when you think about the ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, the self, and then you go beyond that, but beyond Ion and go to, by the way, when I read Ion, I was like halfway through, I went, wait, what the flip? What do you mean there's a part one? Because I didn't know. I was
Yeah.
reading book two out of a two-part. So by the way, listeners, if you there's a part one and part two. Uh,
So your video game was dropping you into the unconscious.
I was sitting on the couch and I was sitting here thinking, like, oh my God, I am playing the unconscious, like the collective unconscious to the ego of a character that
Hmm.
is, I mean, if we take this into like, if the world was a video game, I am
Right.
nothing more than the main character of my own video game being pushed
Exactly.
and pulled by the forces of the choices that someone
And
else is
what is the
going.
name of the game again?
Silent Hill.
Silent Hill. Okay. Well,
Yes. And this
that
goes for any
game,
video game, but
right?
like, how you're the
But
main
that game
character.
is going on uh, in all of our psyches all the
Yes.
time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. So go
And
ahead.
and that's how I kind of went through and read this book too, going like, okay, so here's the main points I see from this foretelling, or this telling of this story here,
Right.
and all that, and then also looking at life as
Yeah.
well and
So
going,
let me just sum
oh
up a little bit of what we
yeah,
were saying,
mm-hmm,
in that um, the God image, which is the self,
mm-hmm,
is your idea of what God is.
mm-hmm,
And everybody has their own idea of
mm-hmm,
that. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It exists. It
mm-hmm,
exists in your psyche. Okay. And so that's you individually and how you're getting pushed and pulled by your life as you go through
mm-hmm,
it. The, but God is the collective unconscious. Okay.
mm-hmm,
And that collective unconscious has many parts to it.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so we have the collective unconscious as you meet it in the United States,
mm-hmm.
which also has many parts in it. I mean, we have people from every nationality, race, interest
Creed,
group, whatever, from
yeah,
all over the world. And we all bring it into this central thing.
mm-hmm,
And we all know what an American is,
mm-hmm,
but that's it. It's
mm-hmm,
all of it, right?
mm-hmm,
And that's what the collective unconscious is.
mm-hmm,
Now, some parts of the collective unconscious are stunted because some societies have not allowed their societies to develop. Um, but nonetheless, we're all governed, and all the things that are happening in the world right now
mm-hmm.
are um, part of that. And
Do you ever
it's
feel like when thinking of the self and the God, the God of the self, right? Or your idea of your personal
your God
Jesus.
image, yeah.
If Depeche Mode didn't nail it in a song,
Hmm.
um, the Greeks did a really good job at understanding the different aspects of a totality
Of gods,
of
right?
God, with the many
Sure,
different gods. Someone could be like very warlike, very Mars, very
sure.
Aphrodite, again, that feminine energy as well. And so
Yep,
you have the whole list, the whole run of Greek gods, that it was like, oh, if your personality is exuding the energy of this particular god, it's because, again, that
right.
unconsciousness is tapping into you at that moment in that time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
For a very clear delineation of that, what you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, the Greek gods, uh, please do read Jean Shinoda Boland's Gods in Every Man and
Yeah.
Goddesses in Every Woman,
Mm-hmm.
because there she breaks it all down. Who are all these people and how do you meet them on the street? Because
Mm-hmm.
they're there, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
um Now we touched on the ego, the shadow, anima and animus. That was honestly, like, for me, like one of the toughest of the four first chapters to get through, because it was like having to, well, one, Latin's not very easy, but
yeah,
also getting past that. And by the way, Carl Gustav Jung in his books, he's a G at throwing out his he wants to make sure that he knows that that he knows what he's talking about. So he'll throw
right.
in Latin words and texts and such, which I don't know about you. I didn't really get too into it. I was like, oh, that's a Greek word. Skip. Like
Yeah,
I'll probably address that 20 pages later. Um
yeah.
in a leisurely reading. And it was quite fascinating to understand that, like, honestly, at the end of the day, how I took away that chapter was, um for sake of the podcast, I don't mind cursing or whatever, because, like, it's freedom of speech and etc. But I
Mhm.
felt like anima and animus was like, honestly, like, the if the male, like, not if, but when the male, if you think of like the yin and yang symbol,
Yeah,
there's, the masculine, the feminine, and in each part, of the masculine, feminine symbol is a little bit of the other.
Hmm.
So, the white eye in the black field, black eye in the white field. And I felt like to sum up that whole chapter was the anima and animus in each of the different sexes, right?
Yeah.
It all comes down to the bullshit test, you know? If I mean that's essentially what it is. If a man walks up to a woman at a bar, the bullshit test is my archetype, my idea of what the ideal man is set up by my one male figure as a
Right.
woman, and
Hmm.
you need to prove to me that you're better than that.
Yeah.
And no, that's really
That's
what it
right.
is. That's dating.
Yep.
That's dating. Are
Right.
you
Right.
better
Right.
than the ideal man symbol that I grew up with and I understand
Right.
as that? And for the
Right.
man, it is, are you as nurturing and as caring as the ideal woman that I understand from birth being my mother?
Yeah.
And so these
Right.
kind of two plays of the different I guess
Right.
tests, the ultimate test, are you any better than that? As soon as I
Right.
kind of that idea clicked in my head, I went, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
that's what that whole
I'm
chapter is
gonna
about.
pull up a diagram for you because I think it'll be very helpful.
Sure.
Which is why I'm a little bit distracted here as
Oh, you're fine.
I'm
Is that how you kind of felt with like anima and animus as like
yeah, sure.
an idea to
Yeah.
kind of mull on that chapter there? Because that took me a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Ion. Carl Edinger or Edward Edinger is terrific
Mm.
because he brings, he serves as sort of a middleman between Jung and the average human being.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he did a number of lectures on the more difficult Jungian books.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is the Ion lectures.
Yeah.
And
It's a
so,
doozy.
pardon?
It's a doozy. Ion's a doozy. Like
Yeah,
if you don't have like I feel like Ion's a doozy if you don't have a basis or like for me, thankfully, I had two video games to look at and go, oh,
right,
got it. If you don't walk in, I think that Ion really helps if you have something to kind of paradigm off of,
right.
you know? And I felt
Um,
like, I don't know, but like last year, I felt like I went through a course literally unbeknownst to myself, like just going
mhm.
like, oh, I'll just read this book. So
Edinger's book, The Ion Lectures, that's what it is.
nice.
Okay. And so that book, that's a very good book. But
Yeah.
aside from that, that's one of the most central images in Jungian psychology,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Hold
So,
on.
and so that's what he was always talking about
Mm-hmm.
is that. Um, and you can get lost in the weeds with Jung because he's always uh, he's got all these footnotes and
Mm-hmm.
bada bee bada ba, and you have to sort of get your bearings. It's like your video game. You're lost in this foggy darkness, and you have
Yeah.
to have some experience, and then gradually you get it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep,
And
absolutely.
so to say that God is the collective unconscious does not mean that there's no God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it does not mean that. And if anything, and you can have numinous experiences. You were talking about one,
Mm-hmm.
and numinous experiences have been the basis of all religions, as a
Mm-hmm.
matter of fact. Okay, and so. And once you've had one, and once you recognize it as one,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they often come from synchronicities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you've had a numinous experience, then okay, then there's no more I have to believe. Then
Mm-hmm.
this is what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
And this is about the divine drama that's here
Mm-hmm.
going on. And also it's outside, it's in the air too.
Mm-hmm.
It's, so you live in California, is that right? So,
Yes.
why is it that you came to me? That's that something in the air told you it would be useful to talk to me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because
Right.
it's not really well, for one, it's well, Jung, it's not a
Yeah.
it's a subject, and
Yeah, it's the subject.
finding someone willing, not only knowledgeable, but because you're way more knowledgeable than I am, but at the same time willing to meet up and talk over such a profound subject matter.
Yeah.
It's not common,
Yeah. Well,
and
psychotherapists want you to pay $150 an hour or more. Probably it's 250 by now.
right.
And that's the thing. I
Hmm.
started to get irritated by the Jungian Analyst Society because basically they play their cards close to the chest.
Hmm.
And honestly, for them to talk, they spend 7, 8 hours a day down in the guts of some stranger's unconscious.
Hmm.
And if it's 7 or 8 hours, that's 7 or 8 different unconsciouses. So it's like getting into a different video game every hour, right?
Yeah. I can only
Right,
like yeah, and I myself can only handle like one,
right,
for maybe an hour and then be like,
right,
and I gotta go do the laundry.
right. Yeah. So why would you want to do that to yourself eight
I
hours a day,
don't
right?
I don't
And
know.
and um, and yet that's what they do. And so, in fairness, doing it outside, like doing something like we're doing now,
Mhm.
is a busman's holiday, right?
Mhm.
It's just the busman rides the bus to his
Mhm.
vacation, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and and so he really doesn't. Those people are already burnt out by their day of work, and so it's only a handful of people that start to see that, wow, this reading of Jung is helping me. It's healing me. It's healing
Mhm.
my psyche in a way that I don't understand, but it's doing it. Right.
Mhm.
And, now I do understand it. But, for the longest time, I was like you with Ion. And as I said, it took me 10 years to go back to Ion.
Mhm.
And then when I did it, we did that class of 32 2-hour classes.
Wow.
But by then I knew what I was doing.
Mhm.
And so it's tough material, but at the same time, our psyches are pretty damn complex.
And it's not gonna be fixed overnight, you know what I mean?
No,
Or not
no.
fixed, but it's not gonna be something that uncovers itself or shows itself overnight,
Right. And also,
It's also not self-proving. It doesn't self-confirm to you. It just kind of goes, like, here's a thought
mm,
because because it's been seen, it's been understood to some degree.
right.
So marinate in that. And
Yeah,
how does this fit in the paradigm that we've come to understand thus far?
exactly. And so there's a famous story of I'm sorry, three famous Jungians who are leaving a lecture of Jung's,
Mm,
and each one says to the other, well, he talked about exactly what my need is right now. Um,
yeah.
okay. Um, and the thing is, if you're in the unconscious, your unconscious is going to find exactly what you need right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's its healing role. And so, as we are talking about the unconscious, you are at least partially in the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And afterward you'll say, wow, I feel better after having that conversation, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we know this because we've been doing it outside psychotherapy in the arts. That's what we did in our confluence
Mm-hmm.
in June in Helena, Montana, of all places, to
I've driven through.
have a meeting, right?
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's a great place actually, and it's the home of my good friend Tim Holmes,
Mm.
um, and he's been studying Jung as long as I have,
Mm.
and wow, is his Jungian stuff showing through
Mm.
in his work,
Mm-hmm.
right? In his sculpture, he's an artist, and so we had this confluence, and all right, there were a lot of artists there, um, but we had two young men from Columbus, Ohio there, and uh, they really felt that they got something out of it, even though um, they didn't know much
Mm-hmm.
about it. Okay, they've been following my videos. They're twins. They're identical twins,
Mm.
and it was very interesting to watch the two of them go yep 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 yep. Yep. You know, they're finishing each other's sentences, right?
Yeah, you're just looking at the both of them
You
going
know,
like,
but one of them is a welder, and the
uh-huh.
other one is trying to start a trucking company.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not the kind of people that you would expect to go to you know, a brainy psychological conference
Hmm.
on connecting art and psychology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And yet they were there, they were very attentive, and they loved it.
Nice.
Okay, and by the way, they also, the one who's a welder, Tim Holmes, is a metal worker. I mean, his art is in metal shop,
Mm.
and so he offered to do a collaborative project with the one that's a welder,
Okay.
and so there are, you know, tremendous things come out of these things because you connect up with people.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, just give you an example. When we were organizing the thing, we organized it with um, an older artist who's going to be 90 on September 4th. Okay,
Wow. Okay.
and but she's been studying Jung and using Jung in her ceramic studio since the 1950s, and um, when Tim and I started to think about what we were doing in June, I said, "Well, geez, if we could get Colleen to come, that would be awesome, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And so I called her, and she said, "Well, if you hadn't invited me, I would have been angry." and so she did come, and we wanted to um, give her a lifetime achievement award for her work
Nice.
in Jungian psychology, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we cooked up creating an award that Tim then manifested, right?
Mm-hmm.
He created it, and then we gave it to her as the first awardee in June. So it's really interesting. I mean, the interesting thing about her intuition
Mm-hmm.
is we were working on this for a year. Every month we'd get together on Zoom and we'd be talking about what we were doing. And so after about last September, her intuition started to know that we three guys were up to something. She didn't know what we were up to,
The
but
spidey senses were tingling.
right, she knew that something was up. And so she, you know, she started to ask a lot of leading questions, and we, you know, finally we had to say, well, yeah, we've commissioned Tim to do this water bearer award,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but we, or not to do the award, but we've commissioned Tim to do a sculpture
Mm-hmm.
to be launched at the Confluence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And she accepted that. Okay. She
Mm-hmm.
accepted that. So she never knew, even though we kept working on it another 9 months, she never knew that it was for her.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
That it was all for her. And so on the YouTube channel, you can see this little award ceremony. It's only 7.5 minutes, but you can see uh, us awarding the first water bearer to her. Actually, Tim uh, gave it to her,
That's
and,
so awesome.
it was awesome. It truly was awesome, and she's thrilled with it.
Nice.
Uh, so anyway,
Yeah.
go on. So
Oh,
go
no, no,
on.
no. You're good. You're good. You're good. Thank you for sharing that because like, um, you're right though. Like the niche of young, I have come to notice that whilst talking with some professionals and just meeting people as one does, sometimes young shows up and
Yeah.
it turns into a, oh, actually my sister is a psychologist as well.
Oh.
And but we
Mhm.
don't, no, I'm like, no, we're not. No, nope.
She's
But what I did,
probably a Freudian.
probably, I'm not
Yeah.
sure, but I did mention to her that I was reading Ion, and she was just like, I asked her because I had questions, and I was like, well, since you're family, I got free access, and
Mm,
and I don't need an insurance policy on this advice.
right. I'm
But
interested. What did she say?
she said, I swear to God, I'm not making this up. She said, yeah, we talked about Young for like a day.
Uh-huh.
I have no idea about him. And I went, well, that's really unfortunate. And she goes, yeah, we spent about the same time on Freud too, and just walked away. And I was like,
Yeah.
well,
Okay. You
guess I'm
want to
just gonna
know?
have to, I'm gonna have to be the family expert on this subject matter that I don't even have a degree in.
Well, I don't have a degree in it, but I do have a statuette.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so at least somewhere it's in the
I
ether.
feel, I don't know about you, but I feel like if you could get through at least one young book or
Yeah.
lecture or whatever, it's I feel like that's your little gold star that you're a Jungian. You've at least made it through the gauntlet, whatever
Right.
marathon, 10K, half K, whatever length you decide to go through, even if it's an audiobook.
Right.
You're a Jungian. Welcome to the family.
Well,
Welcome to the club.
audiobooks how I got into it to begin
Yep.
with. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And or into him. And one audiobook that's excellent is Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which
Mm.
is his memoir
Mm-hmm.
of his development on his psychological side. Okay, so
Mm.
it's not a memoir about the dates and
Mm-hmm.
events of his life,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a memoir about how his psyche developed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very powerful. And I've probably listened to that audiobook about 15 times, as a matter of fact.
Wow. Wow.
And it never gets old. He had some pretty amazing visions and dreams, I can tell
Mm-hmm.
you.
I've always wanted to get into well, from jumping from Ion, I've wanted to get into the black books and of course the red book, the holy grails of his psychoanalysis and his dream reading as well, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it'd be very interesting to read his by like uh autobiography. Is that a way to kind of put it?
Well, it
Of his
wasn't an auto.
psychological
This is his memoir.
memoir.
Okay,
Memoir.
that's what
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's his memoir of how his psyche developed.
Mm-hmm.
And if uh, have you got a red book yet?
No.
Okay, well
No.
you need two red books. You need the big one, and that's an expensive trip. It's nearly
Jeez.
$200, but
Ugh.
it it has all the, and you need it because you need all the images that are in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you need a reader's edition, which you can mark up,
Yeah.
because once you get yourself an actual red book, the big one, the folio edition, uh, you will want to treat it as if it was sacred,
Mm-hmm.
and it is.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I made for our confluence, I made bookmarks for everybody. And on one side it said the name of the confluence, Helena, Montana, and uh, it had the citation for the other side, which had a quote from the first chapter of the Red Book,
Mm-hmm.
first chapter, and there were no two quotes alike, and I just mixed them up. I made 50 of them, passed them out at the confluence, and I said, by synchronicity, this was meant for you. But
Mm.
but if you don't think so, then turn it in and draw another one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because there were a few others. Nobody turned theirs in. Everybody kept the original one they were
That
issued.
is so cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but it is a powerful book. I'm reading the black books right now, but
Yeah.
I don't necessarily recommend that for a start.
Mm-mm.
But in terms of synchronicity, um, I, oh my God, how do I tell you this? I, I have I have synchronicities that happen to me every day,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I have to go get my volume 7.
It's all
Uh,
right. Yeah, no
I
problems.
want to read to you what came up on the last page of all the 7 black books. So I'll be right
Okay.
back.
Sure.
So this last entry in the black books was entered on December 14th, 15th, 1932.
Okay.
Okay. And I've had the black books on my podium for about 3 years, and I've
Mm.
never have opened them. Okay.
Okay.
And about 2 months ago, I decided, well, okay, I learned a decade ago that you can read the Red Book backwards as well as forward, and it means the same thing,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
Okay. and so I decided, okay, I'm going to start the black books by reading volume 7. So this is volume 7.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's the larger of the
Yeah,
books. Yeah.
right. That's
Mm-hmm.
the larger one. Right. And so I started it at such a time.
Mm-hmm.
This is the synchronicity now. I started it at such a time that I would finish the last page on this past Monday. Okay.
Okay.
Now, I was reading the last page in the morning at the same time that our former president's place was being raided.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
At the exact same time, I was reading this at the exact same time that raid was going on. And the third to last footnote in here um, is very powerful. It's a reference to biting through, which is a hexagram in the I Ching. All right.
Okay.
And here's what he says in the third to last footnote on the last page. And here are my stars on it.
Oh yes. Okay.
Okay.
I put stars next to Julia Child's cookbook recipes that actually work out for me because you gotta 5-star review her foods.
Okay. Yep, that
I
makes
get you.
sense.
I get you.
Okay. All right. So energetic biting through overcomes the obstacle that prevents joining of the lips. The storm with its thunder and lightning overcomes the disturbing tension in nature. Recourse to law and penalties overcomes the disturbance of harmonious social life caused by criminals and slanderers.
Wow.
The theme of this hexagram is a criminal lawsuit in contradistinction to that of Sung, which is a conflict that refers to a civil suit. So here it's Merrick Garland finally
Mm-hmm.
dropping the hammer
Yeah.
and sending the feds to
Wow.
grab this stuff. And I'm sure if you spent much time in the Navy, you know how seriously we treat um, nuclear secrets,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I know in my case, I know that if I had taken even a single page of
Mm-hmm.
something like that out of the building, I would immediately go to jail,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would give me a trial and put me in jail for like 5 to 20 years, depending
Yeah.
on how serious it was.
Yeah.
But I just learned that he had top secret SCI
Mm-hmm.
material um, in Mar-a-Lago after he turned in 15 boxes back in February.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so Michael Beschloss, who's a presidential historian, said this can amount to espionage or even treason.
Mm-hmm.
And So, but for me, I'm just talking about for the purposes
Yeah.
of this conversation, I'm only talking about the synchronicity that
Mm-hmm.
that
Reading
was
this.
that raid
Yep.
was happening at the exact same time that I was reading this particular page,
Mm-hmm.
which happened to be the very last page of Carl Jung's Black Books.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
okay.
Yeah, but like at the same time, like that's such a like a what was the universe doing right now moment, and it's one of those things that I've noticed with Jung is to keep an open eye out for those moments, savor it like a
Yeah,
raisin, when
sure.
you touch it, when you taste it, when you enjoy the blast of flavor in your mouth, like enjoy these moments and it, don't expect to understand it immediately, but again, marinate in that moment and then go back and revisit it if you've
Yep.
made that personal note about that moment.
Right.
you know um so at the end of Aion, the part that kind of pissed me off for about a month straight
Right. Okay.
was, we go through with Aion. uh I'm just going to go through the parts
Yep.
because Christ, a symbol of the self, is a chapter, but then underneath that are other sub chapters as well as major chapters, such as Sign of the Fishes, uh, prophecies of Nostradamus, historical significance of the fish, ambivalence of the fish symbol, fish in alchemy, and he goes into more details about that. Psychology of Christian alchemical symbolism, and these are all supporting his these are subchapters that I effectively call the supporting documentation. And then we get through structures and dynamics of the self. So we get back to reality a little bit.
Mhm.
And then he concludes in about, I think it's like 4 pages, 5 pages. And the last paragraph of Ion, oh my glob. As soon as I read out loud, I read it in my head silently at the dog park with my dog. And then I
Mhm.
read it out loud to make sure that I just read what I just read. He's like, "Hey, by the way, all that stuff about the fish, yeah, this is just, not scientifically proven, but it was information that I saw and information that I read about. And, these are documentations as per my footnotes that I have allowed you to go and check my sources. But just because I said that this is a thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a thing. So I'm sitting here going like, I sat on a toilet reading this book trying to understand these chapters. Like,
Yeah. Well,
what in the world? Like, I was
okay.
like, oh my God. I was like, Young, Mr.
Okay,
Young.
you piqued my curiosity, so I have a
I have
on
the same
here.
copy. I have the same copy. But
Right. Okay. So let's read the last paragraph here,
sure.
shall we?
do some
Okay, so the last paragraph.
Yep.
I am well aware that this work, far from being complete, is a mere sketch
Yep.
showing how certain Christian ideas look when observed from the standpoint of psychological experience. Okay, so that's an important point.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, my main concern was to put out the parallelism of the difference between the empirical findings and our traditional views. A consideration of the disparities due to time and language proved unavoidable. This was particularly so in the case of the fish symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, we move here on speculative hypothesis or tentatively reconstruct a context. Naturally, every investigator must document his findings as
Mm-hmm.
fully as possible, but he should also venture an occasional hypothesis, even at the risk of making a mistake. Mistakes are, after all, the foundation of truth, and if a man does not know what a thing is, it is at least an increase in knowledge if he knows what it is not.
Yes.
Okay,
And I sat
that's
here, I was like this. What?
okay, but
I
he,
mean,
yeah,
later on, I kind of sat here and I was like this. Oh, it's not that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Of course he does. But at the same time, I was sitting here going like this. When I first read that paragraph, I was just like, I feel like this is a bombshell on the whole last 5 months that I just tried spending trying to understand this man, what his
yeah.
message is, what his, documentation shows. And then he lands this bomb of like, yeah, I found this information for you. I wrote this lecture here for you. And by the way, like Murder She Wrote, you never
That's
know.
it.
Maybe it
Yep.
wasn't the butler. You never know. Like
Yeah, right. Well,
it's like that, that Jessica
that's
moment where only the epiphany will happen for her and nobody else in the show, because it's
yeah,
Jessica,
right,
Fletcher,
right.
um,
So,
or Columbo or whoever.
in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung says how conservative he is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if he had started walking into cathedrals in um, the 19 teens when he was writing the Red Book and started throwing bombs in
Mm-hmm.
cathedrals, that would not have been good. He
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
and he recognized that there was stuff afoot in the collective that um, that he had best leave well enough alone until
Mm-hmm.
after World War II. The reason was
Very
that
delicate time frame to bring up
right,
anything. I mean, because
right,
obviously, yeah.
yeah. So 1913 is when he started the Red Book, started writing it,
Mm-hmm.
and he had these precognitive dreams which predicted World War One,
Mm-hmm.
and then it happened, and he said, "Well, I was the happiest man in the world that day
Mm-hmm.
because I realized that I wasn't crazy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
there's something here, and these were precognitive dreams, um, and so then that set him to his real work of his
Mm-hmm.
lifetime, right? And so then World War One is over in 1918. He said he said he knew that there was going to be a second world war in 1919 because he was seeing it in his clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because there were resentful men filled with rage and resentment from the Treaty of Versailles, which was very punitive on Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And he was seeing these people in his clinic, and he knew that there was going to be another war.
Yeah.
Um, and so he thought he better keep quiet about that and hope that he was wrong, but he wasn't. And so he just laid low. Now he wasn't he wasn't all things golden here.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I performed in a play in Helena. Did you see this by any chance? My play in Helena.
Oh,
Uh,
no, no. Sorry.
okay, let me give it to you here. Let's see, how do I get to it? I'll give you the link to it because um, the significance of this play
Mm-hmm.
is that Jung made some mistakes. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
he really did, and um, and so this play is about Jung's shadow.
Mm.
And let's see if this works. Hopefully, I'm going to put the link in here. The link is called "The Analyst and the Rabbi,"
Ooh,
and
interesting.
I played Carl Jung in this play. It's only 1 hour long,
Okay.
um, and but in this play come out a lot of the deep dark secrets that the analyst community would never tell
Right.
about Jung, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they try to sweep it under the rug, but we can't not tell it. We have to tell it.
Mm-hmm.
And so right in the third, I'm sorry, the fifth speech, my fifth speech
Mm-hmm.
in the play, because I played Jung in the play, um, he says he had a dream about Sabina, and Sabina is Sabina Spielrein. Have you ever seen the movie A Dangerous Method?
No.
Oh, you must see that. Okay, so
I'll
there's
write it
two.
down. A dangerous method.
Yeah, I'll put it here. Okay, that's important. And then there's The Soul Keeper. These are both about Sabina Spielrein from different points of view. But A Dangerous Method has Keira Knightley in it as Sabina. It
Ah,
has Viggo Mortensen as Freud and Michael Fassbender as Jung. Um, and so, if you haven't seen that, go see that tonight.
sure.
Okay, all right. Now that movie is all about a period before the Red Book period started. Okay, it
Mm-hmm.
mostly happened during the time that he was collaborating with Freud.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in this play, in my fifth speech, when
Mm-hmm.
I start talking about this dream with Sabina, uh, which involves the speech is something like this. She was running frantically, naked, her daughters too. She was being chased by Gestapo troops in black uniforms.
Mm.
The soldiers took aim and killed all three in cold blood. I was filled with anguish. And then that voice, and then my anima says, what did the voice say?
Mm-hmm.
And the voice said to go see the rabbi. And so that's the genesis of the beginning of the play.
Oh.
But when I read that as a group when we were first organizing this last November,
Mm-hmm.
I just broke into tears. And the reason is that I have surmised that Sabine Spielrein's first daughter was Jung's.
Mm.
And then she, in 1907 or so, they separated, and she went on her way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and But she was pregnant when she left, and I suspect this daughter was hers, and
Mm-hmm.
I've always assumed that. And so when I read that when we were doing a read through of the play, I just wept.
Mm-hmm.
um, and there's several other things that aren't very nice, but we have to get the shadow out,
Mm-hmm.
right? and so that's why I played this role, because, and it was a very difficult role to play because I was having to uh, eat Young Shadow, basically.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
and we get through it in an hour, amazingly.
Mhm.
But it's a it was a difficult play to do.
You mentioned
And
eating a a a person that we both um have come to know in our own way, right?
right,
And all the information that's readily accessible out there in the internet, as well as his collective works as well, and his
yeah,
books and things like that. I too understand in a way the same feeling that I think you experience, and I think people who read biographies go through this, where if you found out, like, for example, for myself, whilst on deployment, I read the biography of Lev Therman.
uh,
Not a great guy. Kind of a POS for the time frame, and at I still haven't finished his biography 2 years
mm,
later because there is something that is just so for someone who created a music instrument that I love to play
mhm.
with his namesake on it, and I love it.
And what is the instrument?
The theremin.
The
Oh,
theremin. I
you've heard
don't.
it. You've heard it. You've heard
Yeah,
it.
I'm
Star Trek.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah, it's the
right,
only instrument you can play without touching.
right. And
um,
remember, Star Trek Next Generation is all about archetype. You know that,
yep.
right? Okay, go
Oh
ahead,
yeah,
but
we're gonna
carry
get
on.
right into that.
Okay.
Freaking I still haven't gotten through that biography because he is such, like, there's nothing redeemable about Lev Therman.
Hmm.
At this point he's still in the Gestapo, or not Gestapo, but the gulags of Russia,
Hmm.
in as much of the biography that I'm reading, and it's so disappointing to see. I wouldn't say romanticized, but I mean, definitely, yes, understanding that people come with their faults as well.
Sure.
Be like finding out if Steve Irwin wasn't exactly the greatest zookeeper in the world. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah, like
or
that.
Bob Ross, if we found out that Bob Ross's paintings were where all the bodies are hidden. Like
Yeah,
I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's like that,
yeah,
and I
sure.
understand what it's like. I think in a way to, gosh, spend time and think you have an understanding of someone's, or you think you prepped yourself ready for getting into someone's shadow or reading about it, and then really going like, wow, wow, you know
Yeah,
yeah. I applaud you for the dive in, my good sir.
yeah.
So, speaking of Star Trek, inspirations of Ion in pop culture. I've listed down a couple of things. I wonder if you've ever uh looked at pop culture and gone, I see what they did there. Um,
Sure,
for
sure.
myself,
Because Hollywood discovered Jung 50 years ago, 70 years ago,
hmm
right? They've been doing it since forever,
yeah, yeah.
and very consciously, okay, very consciously.
One of the few films that two of which I've watched. In fact, more recently, last October during Halloween, I was watching American Psycho, and there's a moment at the very end where the guys that he amongst himself with, I didn't
Mm,
realize until after reading Ion. I was like, those are all portions of himself.
yeah,
So what is the self? You know what I mean? Like, what is the true persona of this individual? Again, the idea of
not the
like,
persona,
or not the
not
persona,
the
no.
the
What is it called?
the driving force. May the
Yes,
force be with you.
yes.
Okay, may the force be with you. That force is the
Mm-hmm.
self.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep, absolutely.
yeah,
American Psycho, that was the most recent film that I watched. I mean, I've watched this film tons of times, but I watched it finally again, and I was like this.
yeah. I mean,
Wow.
did you ever have a like a near car accident or start skidding on a slippery
Oh
road,
yeah.
and you don't even know what you did, but somehow you got out of it.
Yep.
That's
Mhm.
the self
Mhm.
at work.
Mhm.
Okay. Your self sees stuff that you can't see
Mhm. Absolutely.
unconsciously. But
Fight Club is another film that I watched and I was like, "Oh, classic.
mm,
Absolutely classic." You know, you got the ego, the shadow, the anima and animus. Um, and at the very end, where it always comes down to integration, I think. When it comes to these stories, like, do you reject the shadow or do you integrate along with it? And
right.
um, I think American Psycho, I'm trying to like not mix both films, but I definitely feel like in Fight Club, it's a really good foretelling of like how to come to terms,
hmm
right? As
Yeah.
opposed to American Psycho is still kind of like this rejection
Yeah.
of the self, the denial of of the shadow. Star Trek is another huge one. There's so many episodes in TNG, like the infamous Riker episode where he's doing the play and he doesn't
hmm
know which one is reality and which one is not.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of a Troy adjacent episode, which I'm not a fan of.
yeah.
Uh, it's always some kind of feeling that she doesn't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Voyager. The whole idea of Voyage Star Trek Voyager is
hmm
Jungian. In fact, on episode 2,
hmm
Kate Mulgrew's character, Captain Janeway, quotes Young to
Yeah.
Commander Chakotay, and it makes a whole bunch of sense when you think about it. This ship is lost in the Delta Quadrant, the
Yep.
unknown, and every character is again an archetype,
hmm
a
hmm
specialty in their own way, and they're all just trying
Right.
to get home, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and on a yearly basis, I read Alice in Wonderland, and every time I read that book, I feel like I just find something a little bit more different about Alice every time she and I go to Wonderland and come
Yep.
back
Down the
to
rabbit hole and
exactly, yeah.
right.
So, what kind of pop culture do you ever like run into, and you're like, "Oh, Young."
Well, I mean all of it now. I mean, we've been doing, you can see from the Dropbox I showed
Hmm.
you for our advanced reading group that we've been doing Eric Neumann. Um, he's done a 3-volume series on art in culture,
Hmm.
and so the first one that we're reading of the three is Art and the Creative Unconscious.
Hmm.
This is the book, and we've been working on it for about 6 months, and we're to page 113. um, but in the first part of it, he goes in very great detail about Leonardo da Vinci. I mean,
Hmm.
hugely. So, the let's see, Leonardo da Vinci takes up like the first 90 pages of this book, or
Gosh.
not quite that much, but first 79 pages of the book,
Hmm.
and first 80 pages of the book, and then it goes into art and time and how uh, one's time you see that coming through in works of art. It's
Hmm.
very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Um, and so we've, in our recent weeks, we've been studying that, and we've been having very, very, very rich sessions. And finally, in July, I got the advanced reading group to let me start editing those sessions and putting them on YouTube.
Yeah.
Up until now, they've only been on Dropbox for the members, and so gradually, I'm going to get around to editing those.
I know editing is like one of those like, oh, this is gonna take some time. Where's the meat and potatoes? I feel yours. I feel
Right, and
your energy on that.
I started last Saturday
Hmm.
reading banned books, and I started with Animal Farm, and I just finished chapter 6 today.
Hmm.
Um, but the question came up with chapter 1 from one of the people that was listening. Why
Hmm.
is it that um, why is it that the banned books are all books that are intended to warn us about a problem?
Yeah.
And oh boy, yes, that's it. That's it. Exactly.
And there's the Pandora's box that we've all been looking at.
Right.
Yep.
And so, you have to pay attention. And
Mhm.
so here's a Pandora's box. There's a movie called Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones.
Mhm.
It's a 2019 movie. It's on Amazon Prime and it's on Hulu.
Okay.
Okay. And I urge you to go take a look at it because it will tell you absolutely unequivocally why the Ukrainians will never lose to the Russians.
Okay.
They may be dead, but they're never going to give up.
Mhm.
And from that movie, you understand absolutely completely. And you also understand why the Russians don't get it.
Mhm.
Okay. Why Putin thought, the Ukrainians would just fall over and say, oh, thank God you're here.
Mhm.
And from that movie, you know that the Ukrainians would never intentionally do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And why I think they will fight to the last man.
Mhm.
Um, and so Putin better be ready for a lot more casualties. I guess he's had about 80,000 so far,
Jeez.
and that's a lot of casualties.
One is too many in my heart. Like even
Sure.
with my time in service, I've always um I've, hmm, I never resonated with more of a character than Hawkeye Pierce,
Mhm. Sure.
especially when he and Colonel Potter go out on their first outing together and he's just holding his pistol like this the whole time. Like I've always had that mentality. I know which way to aim because a loud noise goes that way, opposite of
Yeah.
me. But
Right.
um yeah, that was always my point of view. And if we could solve our conflicts with common ground and understanding of one another's uh, obscenities or what are driving forces, right?
Yeah.
Or the unconscious. What's the ultimate push there? And how can we not just appease it, but come to a equal understanding of what how to. I guess the best way to English it is uh, not not say that it's not meant to be there, but go, it's okay if you feel that way, like it's
Yeah.
okay if you want these actions to happen, but do you understand the repercussions thereof and how many lives are affected just by one person's choice?
Right. Right. Right.
um yeah, great movie reference. I'll have to definitely check out Mr. Jones. I was gone in 2019, so I missed out of a whole year of
Well, I did.
content.
I never heard of
Yeah.
it. I never heard of it till a week ago,
Oh, okay.
and my wife was busy that particular night, so I said, "Okay, I'm going to watch this."
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law's 92 was sitting next to me, and she was asleep in the sofa, so I just put my headset on and
Mm-hmm.
watched this movie, and yeah, you
Nice.
definitely get it.
Nice. Where
and
would
and
oh,
and by the way, it has these themes where it has Orwell going through it, and he's writing Animal Farm, and
mm-hmm.
so the movie and the book Animal Farm end with the same sentences.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Wow. Right on. Where would
Yeah.
you recommend people to start with Jung? I personally screwed up, and I'll tell you right now, I purchased my first book was Alchemical Studies.
Oh God.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Like nobody in their right mind would start off with that book, but I was looking at like again Silent Hill, which is again a pop culture reference,
Right.
but because it does delve in alchemy, the
Hmm.
video game, but also the collective unconscious. I had two books here, and I was like, I'll go with the Alchemical Studies book. Sure, it looks like a thick read. I'm not expecting myself to get through it. I still haven't. Um,
Well,
and
yeah. Here are my recommendations.
sure.
Um, Number one would be Man and His Symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And by that, I mean the hardbound version. You might have to get it secondhand, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also in the Dropbox. So if you're in our Dropbox, you can read it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but uh, I think there's also an Audible version. I guess you said so,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I bought that book in 1990, and I read it about 3 or 4 pages a night when my wife and I just went to bed. I would
Mm-hmm.
read it to us as a bedtime story for a year. Okay. For a year.
Sure.
Okay. And at the end of the year, we both felt that we had had a year of psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, I urge people to read that book, but also Memories, Dreams, Reflections,
Memories, dreams,
and
reflections.
and and then read these 3 books that I mentioned that are not by Jung, and
Mm-hmm.
they are Women Who Run with the Wolves
Mm-hmm.
and the 2 books by Jean Shinoda Bolen, which are Gods in Every Man and Gods in Every Woman, Goddesses in Every Woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that will sort of set the world for you in terms of what archetype is about,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the key ideas in Jungian psychology. Um,
It's probably more synthesized than
right.
if you go head into like how I did, unfortunately. Not that like it could go one of two ways when you accidentally jump into the deep end of a pool, and you go, oh, okay, I'm drowning, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. Or it could be like, no, 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 wait, lifeline. Let's try a different book. And that's
Yeah.
what I did. I realized um my ambitions were too big, and I was like, oh, Ion's where I want to start. Okay, let's go there. And then I read halfway through Ion and went, oh, there's a part one. And so
Yeah.
I'm currently halfway through part one of the collective unconscious and the archetypes.
Yeah.
So
Archetypes, the
or
collective
archetypes and the collective,
unconscious.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you actually started at a very difficult stage,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And some of Jung's writing is, I think, probably intentionally difficult.
Do you think it was do you
He
think it's
didn't
because he
want
had to
find.
prove and you're right, it's intentionally difficult, and I think the reason why is because he had to prove himself
Yep, yep,
in a
and
field that is just to this day still being figured out, you know?
right, and so the other book
Mhm.
to read very early is Answer to Job.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
Answer to Job.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
now Answer to Job is 205 paragraphs of volume 11.
Mhm.
So if you want to find it on my Dropbox, you can find it in volume 11. And it starts with paragraph 553 of volume 11, which is Psychology and Religion, and it ends with 758.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me just say this. I'll be happy to converse with you anytime
Sure.
again,
Absolutely. Thank you.
because that's what I do. And I'm not a mental health professional, but
Same
I
here.
think I know a few things, right?
Mhm.
And
So to wrap this all up, what inspires you today, this week, and this month?
uh, what inspires me today and this week is this movie, Mr. Jones. And my wife and I have been really angry about all the new censorship that people have
Mm,
been trying across the country,
mhm.
and we were looking for a way to fight back. And my wife bought all the banned books, or a bunch of them. Okay, she bought a bunch of banned books,
Mhm.
and she put them on our coffee table. One of them was Animal Farm. That's how I happen to have a copy here, because
Yeah.
she bought about 15 books and stacked them up on our coffee table,
Gracious.
so that when our grandchildren visit, they'll have access to them.
Sure.
And so they were there on our coffee table, and then I saw this movie, and I saw the interaction that George Orwell was making with Gareth Jones, and I said, "Man, I got to read this book."
Mm-hmm.
And so I picked it up last Saturday morning and I read it in about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, man, this has got to go onto the YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I've read 6 chapters as of today. And I'm doing some editing. I decided to go ahead and read online live stream.
Mm-hmm.
So chapter 6 is still the raw skip reading, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm also taking it and editing it so that there's a better quality version uh,
Nice.
that I'm going to leave behind. But then I'm going to read 1619. 1619 is one that I think we in the United States need to hear,
Mm-hmm.
and it's there on our coffee table. It was there, and I picked it up, and I said, you know, what's so bad about this? This is just
That's
the
a book that
history of the
was,
country.
yeah, but that's like reading material that even the military goes like, hey, read this book.
Yeah, I'm
What?
sure.
Like, and that's a banned book. I need
Yeah,
to get this list and like just go like,
right.
wait, what?
Well, they're sort of misguided people out there in
Mm-hmm.
the hinterland who think that they can protect their children by not exposing them to things, and they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's the same with one of my daughters who, you know, is trying to keep her kids in religious schools
Mm-hmm.
and not allowing them to experience public schools. Finally,
Mm-hmm.
I think her eldest son rebelled, and so he got to go to public school after all, right?
Nice. Okay.
And but I mean, for his I think last 2 years of high school, um, but you know, she's still shielding them, and children, people, nobody can be shielded anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all out there on the internet.
Yeah.
So, and it's all going to, you know, in the end, people, you know, your children will know what you did to them
Mm-hmm.
by
Yep.
not by not telling them the truth.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or what you hid from them, and they won't be happy about it. So
Yeah. I feel that. I feel
so
that.
that's what sets me off right now, and I'm still quite active in our confluence activity, and we
Mm-hmm.
will be having a confluence 23 in October 13th to 16th of 2023. um,
Awesome.
Something to look forward to. It's going to be at um, Mount Madonna Retreat Center, which is probably within striking distance of you. It's just up above Aptos, California,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Santa
Okay.
Cruz,
Yeah.
just above Santa Cruz in the mountains, and so that's where it's going to be
Wow.
in October of next year. Um, we had a very intense week when we were in Helena, extremely intense.
Mm.
And Tim and I both had a confluence hangover, kind of. You know, it's not because we drank anything, we didn't, but it, just the intensity of it was really incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could only do that like once a year.
Yeah.
And we did that play, and next year we're going to do the follow-on to that play because the two authors are now doing a play about what happened 1 year later
Mm.
with the same characters.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah,
Wow. All right.
it's so it will be interesting.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah, did you ever hear of Eranos?
Aranos. No, I can't. It doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, well, Eranos is was a meeting that Jung went to once a year in Ascona, Italy. Um, and I guess it's Switzerland. It's,
Oh, wait.
it's but it's above Lake Maggiore in
Yes.
Italy, right?
Yes. Okay. You're I'm recalling. Yes.
and various intellectuals would come to that. They would come and they would give a paper every year.
Mm-hmm.
And Jung went to most of those for many years, including during the war. And so the event in this play is immediately after the war, when the Jews were coming out of these concentration camps, and they were pretty pissed off, and they were pissed off at Jung because they thought that he had collaborated too much, which he
Mm-hmm.
didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1933, he had made some missteps, right, which were in his shadow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the 1946 event, which is what this play is about, actually occurred the day after I was born, believe it or not.
Wow.
On October 6th, 1946.
All right.
That's the date of this meeting. And I was born the day before. And I have so many synchronicities in my life related to Jung. I just can't even tell you all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, after this event where Jung meets this rabbi in Zurich,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's he goes to Aranos, and the rabbi is at Aranos
Mm-hmm.
the year later, 1947, and so this new play is about these two guys 1 year later.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how these guys put this together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
That'll be fascinating. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing that. Thank you so much, Skip, for joining the podcast, Inspire with Sean. And anything else that you would like to say to the audience here, where they could find your work? Or I think I pretty much covered it with archetypeinaction.com, correct? And your
right.
YouTube channel.
Yeah, yeah. The YouTube channel Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group
Mm-hmm.
has over 1,300 videos on it. So if you want to learn something about Carl Jung and you just want to listen to it or watch it on your computer, there's plenty there. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and have a good, it's an evening now, isn't it?
Yeah,
We're getting to your
it's
afternoon.
5 o'clock. Yeah.
Well, I
So,
leave you to dinner, good sir, and I shall be enjoying my afternoon editing this audio and video clips, and I'll keep in touch with you. Definitely thank you so much for
yeah,
joining me in this travel through Aion and Carl Gustav Jung.
my pleasure.